I want to start talking about the 12 disciples. Now, Matt tells me that you looked at the 12 disciples not very long ago, so I'm hoping you can tell me straight off who they are.
I can.
Well, tell me one or two. Peter. James and John. Andrew. Thomas. Bartholomew, yes. Nathaniel, I'll come back to him. Phillip, yeah. Matthew, yes.
James, the son of Alphaeus.
James the son, oh, you're very good. James the son of Alphaeus, yes. Andrew, I think we had Andrew, yeah. Judas.
And Judas Iscariot.
Yes, there's two Judases, yeah. And I think you've now got Simon the Zealot. Well done, yeah. I'm trying to count them as we're going through them, and I'm not succeeding. Right, let me see if I can click on. Oh, need to turn it on. There we are. Right, the list comes in the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And in Matthew, it's like this. Right, it's always in three groups of four. It varies slightly. In Mark, it goes like this. In Luke, it goes like that. And in the Acts of the Apostles, which is after Judas Iscariot has left, it goes like that. So the names are more or less the same. The only thing is the ordering is slightly different. Now, of all these characters, the disciples, you've already told me that some are related. Do you remember who we said was related? James and John are brothers, yeah.
Peter and Andrew.
Simon, Peter, and Andrew are brothers. What about the rest of them? What do we know?
Some were tax collectors.
Thomas had a twin, because Thomas is called Didymus, which means the twin. We don't know who his twin was, but there's a twin, yeah. Well, let me go on. Simon and Andrew were brothers, James and John were brothers, and they were the sons of Zebedee and Zebedee's wife. We'll come to that in a little while. Matthew was the tax collector, who's mentioned in Matthew's Gospel, probably the writer of Matthew's Gospel. And then Thomas was a twin, yeah, we've said that. We're going to talk a bit more about doubting Thomas when I come in a few weeks' time. Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the place called Bethsaida. Bartholomew is one we know very little about. I won't say any more because I haven't got time. Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor and betrayed him. And then we've got Thaddeus, who is sometimes called Judas, son of James. It varies slightly. Simon the Canaanite, who's sometimes called Simon the Zealot. And we've got James, son of Alphaeus. He's given that label to particularly identify him. Sometimes he's known as James the Less or James the Younger. I expect that's to distinguish him from James, the brother of John. Okay. So John is always identified in John's Gospel as the beloved disciple. Do you wonder why? Well, at the cross, Jesus told John to care for Mary, and John took her to his own home. To his own home, but he took her straight away to his own home. John was a fisherman, but I want to suggest to you that John wasn't just any old fisherman. John was probably the owner of a business, and he had a house in Jerusalem. And if you think that John had a house in Jerusalem, then one or two things fall into place. One being Jesus' command to take Mary to his own home. So John's identified as the beloved disciple. When Jesus is arrested, John and Peter follow and go into the courtyard of the high priest because John was known to the high priest. Now, how many times have you read that in the Gospel, in John's Gospel? John was known to the high... John, a fisherman from Galilee, known to the high priest, makes far more sense if John had a house in Jerusalem. It makes far more sense. We'll look at that in a moment or two. John was a fisherman, but I'm suggesting he probably had a house in Jerusalem. Right, people around the cross. Many women were there, according to Matthew, watching from a distance. They had followed him from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. There's a lot of Marys in the story. I wish they'd all been called something different. It would be much more straightforward. And I've put them in colour. Right, so we've got Mary, the mother of James and Jose, or however you pronounce that, and we've got the mother of Zebedee's sons. In Mark's Gospel, he says the same, well, not quite the same thing. He says there was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and Salome. So, from Mark's Gospel, we can see that the mother of Zebedee's sons is called Salome. Then in John's Gospel, he says this: near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So if it's the same three people, what it's saying is this, that Mary, the mother of James, is also the wife of Clopas, and Salome, the mother of Zebedee's sons, is his mother's sister. In other words, she's Jesus' auntie, which means that James and John are Jesus' cousins. Have you ever thought that before? Two of the disciples were cousins of Jesus. So when Jesus said from the cross to John, take Mary to your home, he was telling John to take his auntie back away with him. In Luke's Gospel, Luke mentions somebody else. He mentions a Joanna. And if you flick back in Luke's Gospel to chapter 8, you get this. It's just a little sentence that Luke puts in. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, somebody big in society, Susanna, and many others, these women were helping to support them out of their own means. So we've got two other people from a different social class, if you like, Joanna and Susanna, in the story. And I'll continue the next bit in a little while. Matt, what comes next? Oh. Ah. Yes, there we are. So what we've already worked out is that John and Jesus are cousins, which is why John is referred to as the disciple whom Jesus loved. It always seems a strange thing, that, and yet if you think they're cousins and John's perhaps slightly younger than Jesus, a young cousin, and they've been brought up together, then it makes a lot more sense. So we've got Mary, his mother, and she's got a sister called Salome. Mary married Joseph. We presume Joseph has died by this time, as he doesn't appear anymore, certainly not in the crucifixion and all those stories. Salome's married to Zebedee. Mary and Joseph, there's Jesus, and then there's James and John on the other side. Right, let's go on a little bit further. So when at the cross, Jesus said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son," and to John, "Here is your mother," Jesus was telling cousin John to look after Auntie Mary, and John took her into his home. Right. John was a fisherman, but as I've said, he probably had a house in Jerusalem. If you think he had a house in Jerusalem, then far more things fall into place. When Jesus is arrested, you see, John and Peter follow and go into the courtyard of the high priest because John was known to the high priest. Right, we've also got another Mary, Mary, the wife of Clopas. And we know that they've got two sons, James and Jose or however you want to pronounce it, right? Now, in the list of the disciples, we've also got James, the son of Clopas. James and, again, from the apostles, we've got James, the son of Alphaeus. So we've got a Clopas who's got a son called James, and James, the son of Alphaeus, is one of the 12 disciples. Now, what's in a name? Now, my daughter is called Elizabeth, right? And she blesses me for having called her Elizabeth, because when she has to fill in forms, it takes her longer to write down Elizabeth than it does most names. I think now, 30 plus years on, if we were naming her now, we'd go straight to what we always call her, which is Beth. I never call her Elizabeth unless I'm being really, really formal. And Elizabeth is one of those words that can be Lizzie. I call my Beth Lizzie when I'm cross with her, right? Don't be a Lizzie. Oh, forgive me if any of you are Lizzies. I'm not suggesting Lizzies are naughty, but anyway. It could also be Betsy. She used to be Betsy when she lived with us and did the cleaning for us. I used to say we've got a little cleaning woman called Betsy who comes in once a week to do the cleaning. Right? But it can also be Liz, Betty, Bet, and Bethany. Do you see what I'm getting at? It's all the same person, right? What's in a name? Now, Clopas and Alphaeus are two versions of the same name, right? As is Cleopas, who with his companion met Jesus on the road to Emmaus. I'm going to come to that much later. So, from the beginning of the 4th century, which is a long time ago, oh dear. I said it to myself earlier on, I've forgotten now. Eusebius, thank you. Eusebius of Caesarea wrote in his ecclesiastical history about Simeon, the son of Clopas, becoming the bishop of Jerusalem. So this is another son of Clopas. He was the cousin of our Saviour, for Hegesippus asserts that Clopas was the brother of Joseph. So you've got a very old tradition that Clopas was Joseph's brother. So if you draw the family tree a little bit further, there's James, there's Hosea, and there's Simeon there. Joseph and Clopas were brothers. So in other words, Jesus had 3 cousins in disciples. He had James and John on one side, and he had James, the son of Alphaeus, on the other side. 3 cousins in the 12 disciples. Not only that, but when we get to the cross and the people stood round the cross, there's Salome, one auntie, Auntie Salome, and there's also an Auntie Mary, Mrs. Clopas. Right, let's explain something about Jerusalem. That's not the most wonderful of maps, but it's taken, I should say that all this is taken from a little book called The Easter Enigma by a man called John Wenham. Now, when I studied Greek at college, we used Wenham's textbook, right? It's a well-known textbook for Greek scholars. But Wenham was fascinated by Easter and how all the various characters fitted together. And he wrote a little book, it's only a thin little book, called The Easter Enigma. If you see it on Amazon or something, snap it up. It's a lovely little read. And this talk is taken from that book, and the maps come from his book. Right, you've got to, you could probably picture Jerusalem in your own mind, a confined little city with a city wall. Inside it you've got a splendid temple. You've also got various houses where different people live. You've got a fort where the Romans are, and so on. We believe that Jesus was crucified outside the city, possibly alongside one of the main roads. That's where you'd want to do a crucifixion, so that all those travelling in and out of Jerusalem could see what the Romans were up to. And there's a garden tomb. Now, there's at least two possible places for the garden tomb. There's one at the top left, it says garden tomb, and there's another one a little bit lower down. Wenham tends to think it was the one a little bit lower down, and that's the one I'm going to use as I talk about it today. The other thing you've got to realise about Jerusalem and its environs is this. Jerusalem is down one side of a hillside. There's what's known as the Mount of Olives. It wasn't a mountain at all, it was just a ridge. Now, I don't know your geography around here as well as you do, but I think going out that way, there's a little bit of a ridge. I see a line of hills, or a line of a hill, as I look in that direction. Yes? What ridge? Green Sands Ridge, right? As a railway enthusiast, I know that the Bedford Hitchin Railway had to have a tunnel through it. That's by the by. If you are one side of a ridge, you cannot necessarily see what's the other side of the ridge. Agreed? Right. So Jerusalem is one side of a ridge, and the village of Bethany is on the other side of the ridge. And in between them, there's the Mount of Olives. Now, the Mount of Olives was where, from the name, a lot of olive groves were planted. At festival time, Jerusalem was so full of tourists that a lot of them camped out. And where would be a better place to camp than under the olive trees on the Mount of Olives? So when Jesus and his disciples went to the Mount of Olives on Maundy Thursday, it was expected, because that's where they were probably camping out during the festival. Right, let me go on. So on Maundy Thursday, Jesus and his disciples eat the Passover in, by tradition, we call it John Mark's house. It was a house which had a large upper room, and we think it was owned by John Mark's family, John Mark being the author of Mark's Gospel, right? Because in Mark's Gospel comes this little note that when Jesus was arrested, a youth who was there with them, one of the guards grabbed his robe, it came off, and he ran away naked. That only appears in Mark's Gospel, and we think that's because it's Mark saying a little thing about himself, which is lovely. He appears in his Gospel. Judas leaves from that party, and the disciples make their way to get to Gethsemane, as I've shown on that yellow line. A little bit later, Judas and the arresting party march out of the city to Gethsemane. Judas knew he'd be in Gethsemane because that's where they were going to camp. The disciples, without Peter and John, flee over the ridge to Bethany, and they're now out of the way. The arresting party with Jesus go back into the city to the house of Caiaphas. Peter and John follow. Peter and John, after they've followed and gone into the courtyard, and Peter's denied Jesus 3 times and then bitterly regrets what he's done, they go to John's house, and that's Maundy Thursday. At John's house there's also Zebedee, Salome, Clopas and Mary, Jesus' mother. The whole family are there at the house. On Good Friday, around the cross we have these. We have John, we have Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary the wife of Clopas, Salome, and Mary Magdalene. John, and there's then Joanna and Susanna, according to Luke's Gospel, plus other men and women. John and Mary go away, and Salome must go with them, because she then leaves the narrative. So we've got those people watching on Good Friday. At the end, Joseph and Nicodemus place the body in the tomb. Joanna and Susanna, who are of the same social standing as Nicodemus and Joseph, are aware of it and what goes on. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the wife of Clopas, who are from a different social background, they're from Galilee, they're looking on, they're watching the burial. But afterwards, Joanna and Susanna consult with the two Marys as to what they should do. Good Friday, he's now in the tomb. It's now Sabbath. The other thing you need to realise about the Jewish Sabbath is that it goes from evening on Friday round to evening on Saturday. So there's closed down. Nothing is allowed to happen. They go back to the palace, and they go off to John's house, and that's the end of the day. On Saturday evening, when the Sabbath is over, the guards are watching the tomb. Mary Magdalene, Clopas and Mary go off to Bethany to tell the other disciples what has happened. Salome visits the market to buy the spices. Saturday evening, Sabbath's over, traders are trading again. Sunday, very early in the morning, there's a violent earthquake. The guards flee. The stone over the entrance to the tomb has come away. Mary, Magdalene, Clopas and Mary return, as arranged, to John's house. Clopas stays at John's house, and Salome and the two Marys go to the tomb. They see the tomb open, and Mary Magdalene runs back to tell Peter and John. Meanwhile, Joanna and Susanna set out from the palace. They too go to the tomb. They lead Salome and the other Mary into the tomb. They've probably been in the tomb with Nicodemus and Joseph, or at least seen how the body was laid, and they say, "Oh, come on, I'll show you where it is." They take the other two into the tomb where the angels deliver their message. Led by Joanna, they rush back into the city and eventually find their way to John's house. This is a city, and you know how it is when you live in a city. Well, when I drive through Bedford in the morning, there's more than one way I can go through. And in fact, when I go home, the sat-nav takes me on various adventures to get through Bedford when I go home. There's more than one way of doing it. So it's perfectly possible that as Joanna and Susanna were taking Route A back to John's house, so the others were setting off from John's house to the tomb by a different route. John knew the city, so he set off in a different direction. So Mary Magdalene, Peter and John, followed by Mary Magdalene, set out for the tomb. As they return, Mary lingers behind. Let's face it, Mary has gone from house to tomb, run back to the house, and now run from the house to the tomb again. She's probably exhausted. So Mary lingers behind. She sees the angels in the tomb, and then Jesus appears to her. She thinks it's the gardener at first, but it's Jesus. And then she returns to John's house. That's the first appearance of Jesus. Salome and Mary go to Bethany to tell the 9 disciples what's happened and that the tomb is open and that Jesus' body is not there. And as they go, they're met by Jesus on the Mount of Olives. If you read the Gospels and see how it fits in, this is what takes place. And Cleopas and a companion leave for Emmaus. It's late Sunday afternoon. Jesus appears to Peter. And that's all we know. We're not told anything about it other than that Jesus has appeared to Peter. The 8 disciples, not Thomas, they come in from Bethany and gather with the others in the upper room. When I come in 3 weeks' time, I'm going to have a little look at that story and the story of doubting Thomas. And Cleopas and his companion return from Emmaus. And that's how this Easter story fits together, pieces together, with all the various characters and all the goings on. And then, while they're in the upper room, Jesus appears to them all. I'm going to pause now. Angela's going to come and read, and then I'm going to very briefly just comment on what the reading is.
Follow that. It's quite interesting, though, I must admit. I wasn't aware of all that, so there we go. We're on the road to Emmaus, and we're in Luke's Gospel. Chapter 24, starting at verse 13. So here we go. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel." Must be feeling shattered. "And what is more, it is the 3rd day since all this took place. In addition, some of the women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. So make sure I don't take your thing. There we are.
Of all the Easter stories, this one in Luke's Gospel about the walk to Emmaus is probably my favourite. I've already said that Cleopas, I think, is Clopas, Jesus' uncle. And we've got his companion, and the companion's not named. And yet, in the Easter story, I've been able to put names to various other people and how they all fit together. It's only an idea, this. I cannot prove it at all. But I think it might be St. Luke. You see, Matthew is mentioned in his Gospel. He's the tax collector. John is the beloved disciple and is mentioned in John's Gospel. Mark is that young man who had his robe ripped from him when Jesus was arrested, and Mark is in his Gospel. And if this is Luke, it means that each of the four Gospel writers appears in their Gospel. Now, I can't prove that. Some writers think it, including C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, who himself was a writer, of course, said this is the most beautifully written passage from the first-person perspective. It has to be written by the author who was there. Anyway, I'll leave that one there. As I say, whether it's Luke or not, this is one of my favourite Easter stories, if not my favourite. It happened towards the end of the day, the first Easter day, but it hadn't been the sort of relaxing, laid-back Easter day that I hope you had. The two people who we meet at the start of the story had had an uneasy day. In fact, they'd had an uneasy few days. Their friend Jesus of Nazareth had died. Not a natural death, but nor a death due to illness or accident, but death by capital punishment, a brutal and painful execution. And there could be no doubt that their friend had been killed. Now that was sad and devastating enough. After all, they had pinned so much hope on him being the Messiah, the one who would restore Israel, whatever that meant. And now he was dead. And yet just as that terrible news was starting to sink in, so there was other news. News that the tomb was empty. The body of Jesus was no longer there. That was hard to accept. Who would steal his body? But coupled with the missing body were extraordinary stories of angels declaring that Jesus was not dead but alive. What were these two friends to make of it? Perhaps they'd had enough of the big city and decided it was time to leave. And as they journeyed, someone joined them. And it wasn't just a thought in their minds. Now that's important because all of us, I'm sure, have had experience when we have thought somebody has been in the same room as us, even when the place has been empty. But this was no wishful thinking. St. Luke is quite clear about it. Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. And it's evident from verse 18 that Jesus was travelling the same way as them. They didn't just see him coming towards them. They didn't just bump into him at a road junction. From what's said in verse 18 about the visitor being in Jerusalem, it's clear that he was travelling the same way as them. And if they were travelling towards the northwest, and actually nobody knows where the village of Emmaus was, there are several possible locations, but if it was towards the northwest, which is probably the most likely place, then even their shadows would have been behind them. They didn't see him coming. There they were, those two friends on a journey. And as many friends do, they were talking and discussing. The events puzzled them. Jesus had been crucified. So how could he be alive again? Perhaps he hadn't really died, only swooned. But even so, how could he have possibly have moved the stone from the entrance to the tomb? And anyway, the Romans were experts at crucifying people. No, Jesus was dead. And yet some were claiming he was alive. Humanly speaking, they could not understand it. The day was now getting old. They'd probably been up many hours, and they were not concentrating as well as they had. They were tired, and absorbed as they were in their conversation, they didn't notice Jesus walking with them and clearly listening to them for some while before he spoke. But when he did speak, Jesus' question caused them to stand still. It could have been genuine surprise that a third person was in on their conversation, but the real reason for their shock, for that's what it was, seems to be that this stranger didn't know what had been going on. Just think about that. Everybody was obviously talking about it, and yet this stranger didn't know. And so they started to tell him. They described Jesus as a prophet powerful in word and deed. That's what they said, but they limited Jesus to a prophet. Their perception of Jesus was finite. Oh, true, they spoke of him as the one who was going to redeem Israel. They were impressed by his deeds and words, which they described as mighty and powerful. But they went on to say that the Jewish rulers had destroyed him. Jesus, as far as they were concerned, was dead. It wasn't that they doubted the resurrection. At this point, they simply didn't believe that such a thing could happen. So this stranger, Jesus, started to teach them. And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning him. And that, I think, is one of the most important lessons we can learn from this story. We need to grasp fully the whole of Scripture. You can't just settle for the comfortable bits. Now, humanly speaking, Cleopas and his friend failed to recognize Jesus because they'd homed in on just one thing. Jesus was dead. And no amount of hearsay evidence about an empty tomb and visions of angels could have persuaded them otherwise. Like many a modern-day skeptic, they were convinced that resurrection miracles could not happen. But they were about to have their eyes wide open. Now, it was nearly evening, and the friends had reached their destination. Jesus acted as if he was going on further. And I'm sure he would have gone on out of their lives if they hadn't invited him to stay. Jesus now is no longer a stranger to them. They invite him in and give him the supreme honor of him saying grace at the meal. And it was as he took the bread, he gave thanks, and he broke it and began to give it to them, that their eyes were opened. Now, I don't know exactly what it was that triggered it for them. Neither of them had been at the Last Supper, so it wasn't a first-hand memory of that evening, although it's just possible that they might have heard from one of the 11. They could well have seen Jesus say grace before. After all, at the feeding of the 5,000 men had witnessed Jesus saying grace. So I think it quite possible that the action now triggered a recollection. You know yourselves how it is that certain people have a particular style of speaking. When I was a very little boy, my grand's neighbour was a lady called Mrs. Howard, who'd come from Lancashire, I was in Yorkshire. And Mrs. Howard had a particular way of saying Phillip, right? I can imagine it now in my mind, but the way she said Phillip. Different people have different ways of doing things. And Jesus had a particular style of speaking, of praying, and nobody could have prayed like the only beloved Son, giving thanks to his heavenly Father. Jesus spoke the words, took the bread, and as he did, perhaps for the first time, they noticed his hands. His wrists were marked where the nails had passed through. Whatever it was, and I'm not even sure Cleopas or his companion could tell us, but suddenly they recognized him. It was Jesus, and their hearts were burning. Now, those two men had walked 7 miles to Emmaus. It had probably taken them the best part of 2 hours to do the journey. It was now dark. It was now late. Oh, forget the hour. Those two friends had just got one thing in mind, to get back to the others. I said it might have taken them 2 hours to get to Emmaus. I bet it didn't take them 2 hours to get back. They ran down the valley and back along the Roman road into the city. They had news to tell the others, and the others had news to tell them. For yes, it is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. And then, while they were there, he appeared to them all. So a lovely story. Two friends on a journey who represent two everyday followers who need to consider all that is said, who need to invite Jesus to stay with them, and then are blessed with the clearest of sight, for that traveller with them on their journey was their crucified Lord and risen Messiah. For yes, it is true, Jesus is alive. Let's pray. Now, dear Lord, we thank you for that story, how you